Joining us here right now on the Rich Eisen Show is the author of True, The 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson, Kostya Kennedy, a baseball historian and author of this book that is available where all books are sold. Here on Jackie Robinson Day on the Rich Eisen Show. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Rich. Good to be on with you. I'm actually talking to you from Citi Field here in New York.
Fantastic. So, did you eyeball the Seaver statue at all out there today?
I did get a chance to look at it. Yeah, he looks good. He looks big. It's a little bit of a competing interest in a way to have Seaver being unveiled on Jackie Robinson Day, but the statue looks great. It feels like a really special day here.
Of course, they're in the borough of Queens, right next door to Brooklyn, where this all went down on this date years and years ago. When you say the 4 seasons of Jackie Robinson, what do you mean by that?
Well, so, Rich, I looked at 4 specific years in his life, but also they are metaphorically the spring, summer, autumn, and winter of Robinson's public and athletic life. And I wanted a way to kind of look at his evolution sort of in sequence and snapshots, so to speak. There's a series of films by Michael Apted, the Up series, 7 Up, 14 Up, 35 Up, where he looks at a cohort of humans every 7 years, and that's how he follows their life. And so I had to, I was inspired a little bit by that, and that was the tack that I took.
And so what happened on this day all those years ago that you want to recount for us? Can you recount for us the day?
Yeah, 75 years later, and this was the day that Jackie Robinson made his debut at first base in Brooklyn. It was a cold day. There were about 15,000 people in the stands, not close to a sellout. And it's still baseball's finest hour. It remains the most impactful thing that's happened out of baseball, or really out of any American professional sport. And it went quietly. He didn't get a hit. He did get on base, and then he, took off his cleats like every other player, and it was on its way. History was on its way to being made.
And, so when you said quietly, it really was quiet?
Well, it was a little bit of both, I guess. There was a lot of interest, of course, and excitement and news that this was happening, of course. But the actual day itself, sort of paradoxically, as I said, there wasn't a full crowd. It was kind of an ordinary game. He didn't do anything spectacular. And in the best kind of sense, it kind of came and went. I mean, I think Robinson's greatest goal was just to be thought of as, great ball player, just one of the guys, and that was to him true equality and true integration.
Kostya Kennedy, whose book, The 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson, here on the Rich Eisen Show, the 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. Why was he the right man for the moment, do you think?
Many reasons, but it's a really good question. There were a couple of other players, Josh Gibson, maybe Monty Urban, who might have had the skill, or certainly had the skill to succeed. Jackie had grown up in Pasadena. He played at UCLA. He played 4 sports, was a real football star. And in those sports had played with white players, so he was kind of used to an integrated environment in that sense. He had a lot of sort of mental toughness, and he would speak out against injustice. But he was an interesting person that he was a disruptor, but he always disrupted within the system. He wasn't really a rule breaker. And I think Branch Rickey recognized that when selecting Robinson. Another thing just is his play, the fact that he was such an aggressive base runner, so fast, and he brought that every day. That was a huge part of it. It can't be divorced from it at all because, when Jackie was on the field, he was the guy you wanted to watch, and that would have been true whatever ethnicity he was or anything. He was incredibly disruptive as a ball player, super exciting to watch, and that made it really work. He could not get a hit, but still be the most fun player you saw that day.
Is it true they created split screen television for him, getting on first base, that's the first time that we really began to see that advent in baseball broadcasts? Is that true?
Yeah. So I that's been said, and I've tried to sort of nail it down. It was certainly around that time, and he was one of the first people to sort of to take advantage of that, or the producer took advantage of it when Jackie was on base. So he sort of helped speed it along, but it was something that they were looking at doing and trying to get into the game. In general, there weren't a lot of guys who stole bases and were aggressive on the base pass at all in those days. He began drawing comparisons to Ty Cobb, who had retired more than 20 years before. So, so it was a way to show that, and I think that Robinson, wanting to watch Robinson, sort of sped it along, but it probably would have come anyway.
Who are the teammates who were integral in this integration and helping make it work? Who are they?
Pee Wee Reese was probably the most important, just in that he had such respect. He was the captain of the team. He was from the South, from Louisville, and the fact that he embraced Jackie and made him part of the team, that's probably the single most important. But guys like Ralph Branca, pitcher, and Carl Erskine were really important to make it happen. And basically, after some hesitation by a few guys, everybody was on board. There was no way to play with Robinson as an athlete and not respect him and not see the kind of player he was, the kind of commitment he had. So pretty quickly, the whole team was on board.
Kostya Kennedy here on the Rich Eisen Show. You got a story that might whet the appetite of our viewers and listeners who are interested in maybe reading more that's contained in this book, something that you discovered you didn't know? Anything on that front, Kostya?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I one year that I look at it, the year of 1946, which was the year before he broke in on April 15th, 1947. And that year was, in a sense, really the year that he integrated baseball. He was the only black player in an all-white minor league, the best minor league out there, playing for the Dodgers Top Farm Club. And that year was sort of full of treasures, and seeing how he began the integration, some of the abuse he dealt with, also some of the support and adoration he began to feel living in a French-speaking neighborhood in Montreal. I think it's an overlooked part of his life that really came forward as being incredibly important, incredibly rich, and valuable to sort of getting him ready for the challenges ahead.
And, just in terms of his athletic ability a little bit more before we move on to his legacy, I talk to people around here in Los Angeles, some of whom who are, thank goodness, still around and old enough to remember what Jackie Robinson looked like as a collegiate athlete here at UCLA. My friends at the Rose Bowl are honoring him today as well because, obviously that's where he played his home games. And is it true he could have been as good a football player if that's what he stuck to as he was a baseball player? Is that a true story?
I think there's little question. I mean, obviously, you have to deal with the physical punishment of football, and anything can happen to a career, as we know. But at UCLA, he was their star running back, making national headlines. The little bit of existing film, you see him, break into the open field and just leave people behind. He was a strong, physical player with that speed. And he was also rich. He lettered in 4 sports, football and baseball, also basketball and track. And as you may know, or people may know, his brother Mac finished second to Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. So there was incredible athletic ability in the family. He could have been a professional in any level. He was pretty concerned about staying healthy. So when he was in the Army, he was asked to play football and declined because he wanted to sort of keep his body and his knees healthy. And it's a good thing he did. And he brought all of that physicality and that athletic ability to the baseball field.
Kostya Kennedy calling in from Citi Field on the day of Jackie Robinson Day, celebrating and commemorating 75 years of Jackie Robinson having broken the color barrier 75 years ago on this date. So his legacy, how do you think it lives on today in baseball? Kostya?
In some ways, I think there's been a little bit of a resurgence in understanding in recent years of what Robinson did and what he went through. There is specifically the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which Jackie's widow, Rachel, started 50 years ago, that impacts, sends kids to college, mentors them throughout, gives them scholarships. That's an incredibly important foundation, which on the ground level is impacting lives every day. There's no way to get around that. And I think that he also, just the knowledge of what he represented, like you look today out in Los Angeles where you are, Dave Roberts is taking the team out to gather near the Jackie Robinson statue at Dodger Stadium, as he did last year. to just talk about, sometimes, and I've had guys say this to me, you read about what Jackie went through, and suddenly the fact that I went 0 for 4 doesn't seem so serious in a way. And I think people are understanding the kind of pressure and the kind of sort of demands that he had to absorb and go through to be the player that he became.
What would he think, do you think, Jackie, of the state of baseball today? What do you think?
He was sort of generally optimistic, so I think he would be okay with it. I think he'd probably have he was always sort of an advocate for getting representation, African American and people of color into managerial ranks and into the front office. In terms of the state of play, he was not a guy who ever held out for a contract. He was not a guy who got into like rules dissection and stuff like that. I think he'd embrace the game and embrace the opportunity that he had to be in it.
What do you think he'd think of Colin Kaepernick? What's going on in the NFL? What do you think?
I think he would absolutely 100% support Colin Kaepernick's right to do what he wanted to do. I do think that Jackie, who was very close with Dr. King and worked with Martin Luther King in his retirement, in Jackie's retirement on many civil rights issues. They were in D.C. together. They helped repair burned churches in Georgia together. He was very active. But he also broke with Dr. King on Vietnam. Jackie was very pro-American government, pro-military, even though Jackie himself had some discrimination in the Army. So I don't know if Jackie would have been on board with like defund the police, that kind of stuff. He was really respectful of authority through all he did. But of course he would have supported somebody speaking up and expressing themselves and their views. That was really what he was all about.
True. The 4 seasons of Jackie Robinson, the author Kostya Kennedy. Before I let you go, again, this is not your first go-around talking about baseball and its history. What did you make of Dave Roberts removing Clayton Kershaw after 7 innings and just 80 pitches? What'd you make of all of that?
I think that from a baseball standpoint, right, and it was Dave Roberts who did it, but these moves are made also organizationally down in terms of how they're going to use players. That decision is not just about that game; it's about the next series and the whole series. It's what's the right decision to help the Dodgers win the World Series. So I get it. Kershaw obviously had been injured, short spring training, all of that. The only downside really is that fans were deprived. If you went to Minnesota that day, the old adage is, right, anything can happen. There's 162 games, and anything can happen on any day. Well, that day something really special might have happened. It didn't because of that decision.
I know.
So I think it's a little bit of a loss, but I understand why the organization did.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that's the right nuanced answer. I just think, again, here we are on Jackie Robinson Day talking about what an electrifying player he was. I mean, who's the guy in baseball right now who's that leadoff guy that you can't miss because he gets on first and it's entirely possible he scores? We're just so focused on exit velocity so much these days, and it just seems that, I don't know, like the game's different, and I don't know how much better it is, to be honest with you, Kostya. I mean, am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think one of the paradoxes about it is that some of the analytics emphasis on power, right? Emphasis on swing and miss for a pitcher, emphasis on defensive shifts, don't steal, don't hit and run. All of those things make analytic sense. If you're running a team and your goal is to win, I understand why you would say this is what we're going to do. But all of those are things that hurt fans, right? You like to see a stolen base. It's exciting. You want to see the ball put into play and not either a strikeout or a home run. So I think a lot of these advanced metrics definitely hurt people like us, right, who like to watch the game and hopefully, enjoy the game, even though they make sense on the ground in terms of helping a team win.
I mean, the famed line of the general manager du jour, one would say, in Branch Rickey, luck is the residue of design. He meant design of your baseball roster, right? I mean, he didn't mean design of a pitching plan that you put together in a conference room of a hotel room 9 hours before first pitch, demanding your manager put this person in that circumstance after 4 1/3. Like that's the design of baseball these days. Yeah,
no, you're right. That is a design. And I mean, I guess the one thing organizations, and especially organizations like the Dodgers and the Rays, they're really good about communicating that to the players. So at least the players sort of know, and they say, hey, this is what we're doing. But, I agree with you. And I think that there was a moment when Walker Buehler was pitching, I think in the playoffs of the World Series, you have to remind me, a couple years ago when he pitched 7 strong innings and then he came out. And you could see Sandy Koufax behind home plate stand up and applaud Walker Buehler. There's something about a great pitching performance, about being in there. Yes, maybe you get a little tired, you lose a little bit of your stuff, and you're still going on. It's super compelling for a fan to watch. It's just great to watch. And we're, for the most part, losing that. I mean, if we don't get Clayton Kershaw out with a 6-0 lead in the 8th inning when he's thrown 80 pitches, we're not going to get it very often, right? So it's a big loss. No question.
Kostya, thank you for the call on this solemn day, one that deserves to be celebrated, commemorated, and one way to do it is to read your book, The 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson by Kostya Kennedy. It's called True. Thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it.
Rich, my pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you so much. You bet. Enjoy the rest of the day there in Citi Field. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.